She had a confirmed reservation. She had the money. She had every right to walk through those gilded doors. They threw her out anyway. Not because of anything she did, but because of how she looked. What no one in that gleaming Chicago hotel knew, not the sneering manager, not the laughing socialites, not the security guard gripping her arm, was that the woman they were humiliating in front of 100 camera phones had once saved a man's life. A very dangerous man. And that man was sitting in an armored car across the street, watching every second of it. If this kind of story moves you, the kind where dignity fights back and wins, subscribe right now and follow this story all the way to the end. You will not want to miss what happens next. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The rain came down hard that Tuesday evening. The kind of Chicago rain that doesn't care about your umbrella, your plans, or your dignity. It came in sideways off Lake Michigan, cold and mean, slapping against the glass towers of the Loop like it had a grudge against the whole city. Nia Holloway stepped out of a rideshare on South Wacker Drive at exactly 7:42 in the evening. She pulled her coat tighter with one hand and gripped the handle of her rolling suitcase with the other. The leather portfolio tucked under her arm was getting wet at the corners. She didn't rush. She never rushed. Rushing, she had learned a long time ago, made people think they had power over you. She was 33 years old, 5'6", full-figured in a way that the fashion industry spent decades pretending didn't exist. Her coat was dark charcoal wool, not cheap, not flashy. Her boots had real leather soles, worn smooth at the heel from years of actual walking, rather than sitting in the backs of cars. She wore a single gold ring on her right hand, her mother's, and no other jewelry. Her hair was natural, pulled back simply, because she hadn't had time that morning to do anything more than that, and she had stopped apologizing for things like that years ago. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who worked hard, moved quietly through the world, and expected nothing more than what she had already earned. The Grand Monarch Hotel rose before her like a monument to someone else's idea of importance. 42 floors of glass and Indiana limestone, its revolving brass doors polished to a mirror shine every morning by men who made $17 an hour and smiled anyway because the alternative was worse. 2 doormen stood under the canopy in burgundy coats with gold piping, and one of them, the younger one, barely 20, held the door open for a couple stepping out in matching fur-trimmed coats. He let it swing closed before Nia reached the awning. She noticed. She always noticed. She pulled open the door herself and stepped inside. The lobby of the Grand Monarch was the kind of space designed to make certain people feel small and other people feel like they'd finally arrived somewhere real. 40-foot ceilings, a chandelier that had cost more than most houses in the city, marble floors in pale gold and cream that reflected everything: light, movement, judgment. The air smelled of white flowers and money, that specific combination of lilies and leather and something expensive burning faintly in a fireplace that existed purely for atmosphere. Nia crossed the lobby without hesitating. She had been in rooms like this before, rooms that were built to intimidate, and she had learned that the only way through them was straight ahead, eyes forward, spine like iron. She wasn't performing confidence. She just understood that the alternative, shrinking, apologizing with her body language, letting her eyes drift down, would be worse, would invite exactly what she was trying to avoid. She reached the front desk. There were 3 agents working. 2 of them were with guests. The third, a young woman with an immaculate blowout and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, looked up from her screen and then seemed to look through Nia for just a fraction of a second too long before speaking. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "I do," Nia said. She set her portfolio on the counter and unzipped the front pocket. "Holloway. Confirmed through a corporate account. Presidential suite, 3 nights." She slid the printed confirmation across the marble. The agent glanced at it. Something flickered across her face. She typed, looked at the screen, typed again. "1 moment, please." That moment stretched. Nia watched the agent pick up a phone and speak quietly, turning slightly away as if the conversation required privacy. Around her, the lobby moved in its careful choreography, bellhops with carts, couples checking in with matching luggage sets that probably cost more than Nia's first car, a concierge walking a woman in diamonds toward the elevator as though she were royalty being escorted to a throne. The agent put down the phone. "I'm going to need to ask you to step to the side, ma'am. A manager will be right with you." Naya didn't move. "I have a confirmation number. The reservation is valid." "Of course, it's just what?" The agent blinked. "I'll have someone right with you." She stepped to the side because the alternative was causing a scene she wasn't ready to cause yet. She stood there, suitcase beside her, portfolio under her arm, watching the lobby operate around her as if she were invisible. And she felt the familiar low burn starting somewhere in her sternum. Not anger, exactly. More like recognition. She had felt this before. This specific quality of being made to wait in a way that wasn't really about waiting at all. Trevor Langford arrived 4 minutes later. He was perhaps 45, broad-shouldered in the way of men who used to be athletic and now wore it like an old reputation rather than an actual fact. His suit was navy, immaculate, double-breasted. His hair was silver at the temples, and he had worked hard to make it look accidental. He walked with the specific energy of a man who believed he was the most important person in whatever room he entered, and in the Grand Monarch, he usually was. He looked at Nia once, just once, a single sweep from her wet boots to her damp coat to her natural hair. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, and she saw everything in it. "Good evening." His voice was smooth and practiced and gave away nothing and everything at the same time. "I understand there's a question about your reservation." "There's no question about my reservation," Nia said. "I have a confirmed booking for the presidential suite. 3 nights. Confirmation number GML-447829. The account is registered to a corporate umbrella under Holloway Foundations, LLC. I can show you the email, the card authorization, and the corporate ID if necessary, but I shouldn't have to." Trevor's expression didn't shift. That was the tell. A man who had nothing to hide would have looked relieved at that kind of specific information. He kept his face exactly still, which meant he had already decided something before he walked over. "Ma'am," he said, "I want to be very clear that we take all reservation disputes seriously. It's not a dispute. I have the reservation. It was confirmed 3 days ago. So we've had some issues with corporate accounts being compromised. You're saying my reservation is stolen." Silence. Around them, the lobby hadn't stopped moving, but it had shifted. The kind of collective awareness that happens in public spaces when something uncomfortable is becoming impossible to ignore. A man near the elevator glanced over. A woman in a silk blouse paused her conversation. "I'm saying," Trevor said, his voice dropping to something that was meant to sound reasonable but had edges on it, "that the account in question is flagged for review, and until that review is complete, we're unable to—" "You flagged it tonight after I arrived? These things happen automatically. Show me the flag." He paused. "I beg your pardon?" "If the account is flagged for review, show me the documentation. Show me the timestamp on the flag. Because if it was flagged 3 days ago when I booked, your system should have notified me. So either show me the flag or check me in." Something shifted in Trevor's face then. Not quite respect, but its opposite. The specific irritation of a man who expected a certain kind of compliance and wasn't getting it. He had done this before. That was obvious. He knew how these situations usually went. Usually the person got flustered. Usually they backed down. Usually they made the scene smaller because they were embarrassed and outnumbered and tired. Nia was tired. She was also not going to make this smaller. "Ma'am," he straightened slightly, the practiced warmth drained out completely. "I'm going to ask you to lower your voice." "I'm not raising my voice. Your other guests can hear this conversation at any volume because you're having it in the middle of your lobby. I'd suggest moving it somewhere private if you're concerned about them. Or alternatively, you check me into the room I reserved and paid for, and nobody has to hear anything." The man near the elevator, 50-ish, expensive watch, the air of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted, said something to the woman beside him. Nia caught it. She wasn't meant to, but she did. She's making a scene. Typical. Typical. That word. The way it reduced everything, her valid complaint, her legitimate frustration, her absolute legal right to be standing exactly where she was standing, into some anticipated behavior. Some category she'd been placed in before she opened her mouth. She held it together, just barely. Trevor turned to the desk agent and gave a small nod, something coded, and then looked back at Nia with an expression that had calcified into something final. I've reviewed the situation, and I'm not comfortable proceeding with this reservation under the current circumstances. I'm going to ask you to gather your belongings. The words landed like a door slamming. You're refusing to honor my reservation. I'm exercising management discretion. You're discriminating against me. The lobby went quiet then. Properly quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight. Trevor's jaw tightened. I would be very careful about making accusations you can't support. I support it with the fact that I have a valid reservation, valid identification, valid payment, and you haven't given me a single legitimate reason not to check me in. The only reason you're not checking me in is standing in front of you. Someone near the bar laughed, low and deliberate. A woman in her late 40s, dripping in something that was trying too hard, said something to her companion that included the phrase absolutely absurd, in a tone that made clear she didn't mean the manager's behavior. And then it happened. A man, one of the group near the bar, glass of champagne in hand, flushed with the specific confidence of someone who had never once been told no in a public space, walked past Nia toward the elevator. He wasn't watching where he was going, or he was watching perfectly and chose not to adjust his path, and his glass tilted and cold champagne hit Nia's shoulder and the side of her face and ran down her coat. He didn't stop. He glanced back and said, "Oh, sorry about that," in a tone that meant the exact opposite, and kept walking, and someone in his group laughed. Nia stood there with champagne dripping off her jaw. She didn't move for 3 full seconds. She was doing the calculation that women like her had been doing their whole lives. The brutal arithmetic of how much you respond versus what it costs you. Every number in that equation was wrong. Every option had a price she shouldn't have had to pay. Trevor was calling security now, speaking quietly into an earpiece. "I'm going to need you to exit the premises, ma'am." 2 security guards appeared from a corridor she hadn't noticed. Young men in black, expressionless, trained in exactly this situation. They positioned themselves at a distance that was close enough to communicate the threat and far enough to pretend they were just standing nearby. Nia looked at Trevor for a long moment, long enough that his certainty flickered, just once, just briefly. Then she picked up her suitcase. Not because he had won, not because she was giving up, but because there were people in this lobby holding phones, and she understood instinctively that the story being recorded right now was not over. It was just beginning, and she needed to think. She needed to breathe air that wasn't contaminated by whatever was rotting behind Trevor Langford's eyes. She walked toward the brass revolving door. The champagne dried cold against her cheek. Behind her, someone started clapping. One person, slow and sarcastic, and a few others joined in. She didn't look back. She walked through the door and back into the rain, and she stood on the sidewalk outside the Grand Monarch Hotel in the Chicago downpour, and she breathed. It was only then that she noticed the limousine. It was parked across South Wacker, black and armored in the understated way that serious money presents itself. No chrome, no flash, just an absence of vulnerability. Its windows were dark. It had been there, she realized, when she arrived. She hadn't registered it then. She registered it now because there was a stillness to it that felt intentional. Watched. The feeling of being watched from that direction was specific and strange and different from the feeling of being watched inside the lobby. That had been predatory in the way of pack animals. This felt more like, she didn't have the word for it. Attention was the closest thing, the way someone pays attention when something matters. She stood in the rain for another moment, then flagged down a rideshare, loaded her suitcase, and got in without looking back. The limousine didn't move for another 6 minutes. Inside it, a man sat very still. He had dark eyes and a quality of silence that his associates described, when they described him at all, as the loudest quiet they'd ever sat near. He was 41 years old and had scars that his custom suits were designed specifically to conceal. He had not built what he built by feeling things publicly, and he prided himself on that. Emotion, in his world, was a liability someone else would eventually find a way to use. But his jaw was tight. and on the laptop screen mounted between the rear seats, the surveillance footage from inside the lobby was playing. It had been pulled within minutes. He had people for that. People who could pull surveillance from anywhere in the city within the time it took most people to check their voicemail. He had watched all of it: the desk agent, the manager, the champagne, the slow clap. He knew her face. He had memorized it 9 months ago, in a situation so different from this lobby that it seemed impossible these two moments could belong to the same world. He had been bleeding into a concrete floor in a building 2 miles from here, and she had found him by accident. She had been checking on an empty property her organization used, and she had made a decision in about 4 seconds that most people never would have made at all. She hadn't asked who he was. She hadn't called the police. She hadn't run. She had pressed her jacket against the wound in his side and kept pressure on it and said, very quietly, "Stay with me. You hear me? You stay with me," until his people arrived. She never asked his name. She refused the money 3 times. He had found out later who she was, because he found out everything eventually. He had kept a quiet distance, the way he did with things he respected, not interfering, not inserting himself, just aware. The way you keep track of something that matters without wanting to contaminate it. He turned from the screen now and looked at the rain. Then he looked at the man sitting across from him, compact, gray-suited, the kind of man who had spent 20 years executing instructions without ever needing them explained. Damien Vescari said 4 words. "Find out who owns it." The gray-suited man made a single call. Numbers were spoken. More calls followed. Damien sat in the silence and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not rage, which he understood and could manage, but something slower and colder and more absolute. By the time the limousine pulled away from South Wacker Drive, the first calls had already been placed to a real estate acquisition attorney in New York who answered his phone at any hour for only 2 clients in the world. Damien was one of them. The Grand Monarch Hotel, 42 floors of glass and Indiana limestone, its polished brass doors still gleaming in the rain, had no idea what it had just done. And Trevor Langford, at that moment pouring himself a small scotch in his glass-walled office on the 4th floor, smiling to himself because situations like that one always resolved the way he expected them to, had even less idea. The rain kept coming, and somewhere across the city, in a small apartment above a community center on the south side, Nia Holloway sat on the edge of her bed in a dry change of clothes and held her mother's ring in her palm and breathed, slowly, the way she'd taught herself to breathe when the world did what the world kept doing. She was fine. She would be fine. She always found a way to be fine. She didn't know about the limousine. She didn't know what 4 words had just set into motion. She didn't know that by the time she woke up the next morning, the city would be waking up to something none of them had ever seen before. And Trevor Langford's world, polished and powerful and absolutely certain of itself, was already 7 hours away from burning to the ground. The alarm on Trevor Langford's phone went off at 5:47 a.m., same as it always did. He had set it 13 minutes before the hour because he believed, genuinely and without irony, that waking before 6 was a marker of the kind of man he was. Disciplined, ahead of schedule, operating at a frequency most people couldn't sustain. He lay in his king-sized bed in his Lincoln Park condo for exactly 2 minutes, staring at the ceiling, doing what he called his morning calibration, which mostly consisted of reminding himself how well things were going. Last night had been unpleasant but necessary. That was how he framed it as he moved to the bathroom, turned on the shower, and let the water run hot. Unpleasant but necessary. Standards existed for a reason. The Grand Monarch wasn't a Marriott off the interstate. Its clientele expected a certain consistency, a certain atmosphere, and part of his job, the part nobody thanked him for, was maintaining that atmosphere even when it required difficult conversations. He had done his job. He had protected the brand. He repeated that to himself in the mirror while he knotted his tie. He was good at mirrors. He had practiced the particular expression he wore to work, authoritative but approachable, confident but not arrogant, until it cost him nothing to put on. It was the face of a man who had never been wrong about anything that mattered. He poured his coffee. He opened the financial news app on his tablet. He read the first headline and put the tablet down. Then he picked it up again because he thought he had misread it. He hadn't. Vescari Group acquires controlling interest in Grand Monarch Hotel in overnight deal. Sources confirmed transaction valued at approximately $480 million. The coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He read it again. Then he went to 3 other outlets. Then he called Gerald Muth, the hotel's chief financial officer, who answered on the second ring sounding like a man who had not slept. "Gerald, I know." "What do you mean you know? What is this?" "I've been up since 2. It's real, Trevor. It's done. The Hargrove Group sold their controlling stake overnight. Viscari's attorneys completed the documentation at approximately 1 in the morning. It's registered. It's done." Trevor sat down on his kitchen stool. The leather creaked. "That's not possible. The Hargrove Group doesn't sell. Ellison Hargrove has owned that hotel for 11 years. Ellison Hargrove took a meeting at 10 o'clock last night, apparently, and by midnight he had signed. I don't know what they offered him, Trevor. I don't know all of it yet. What I know is that as of this morning, the Grand Monarch Hotel is a Viscari property." There was silence on the line. "Viscari," Trevor said. He said the name like he was trying to taste what it meant, test whether it was real. "Yes. Damien Viscari. His investment group is the registered entity, but yes, that Viscari." Trevor set his coffee cup down on the counter. His hand was steady. He would observe that later as a point of pride. His hand had been steady. "And what exactly does this mean for current management?" Gerald's pause was long enough to be its own answer. "There's been an all-staff communication sent this morning. Every executive, every senior manager, mandatory meeting in the Grand Ballroom at 9 a.m. Attendance is not optional. The phrasing was, Trevor, the phrasing was precise. Not optional." After he hung up, Trevor stood in his kitchen for a full minute without moving. Then he straightened his tie in the reflection of the dark oven door and decided that whatever this was, it was manageable. He was the best general manager the Grand Monarch had seen in 2 decades. His numbers were excellent. His occupancy rates were exceptional. Nobody replaced results like his over a property dispute or whatever political theater was apparently unfolding this morning. He drove to work. He arrived to find the hotel operating with an unusual stillness. The staff moved through their routines, but the quality of the movement was different, quieter, more internal, the way people move when they're all waiting for the same thing, and none of them want to be the first to acknowledge what it might be. The front desk agents wouldn't meet his eyes. His assistant, Margot, handed him his messages without her usual commentary and turned back to her screen before he'd taken 3 steps. He noticed. He filed it. The Grand Ballroom of the Grand Monarch occupied most of the 2nd floor and could seat 600 people for a gala. This morning, it held 47. Every executive, every department head, every senior operational manager the hotel employed. They stood or sat in small clusters near the front of the room, speaking quietly, conversation stopping when Trevor entered. He read the room in seconds, nervous energy, suppressed, with an undercurrent of something else he didn't quite identify until he looked more carefully and understood that some of them were not nervous for themselves. They were nervous for him. He took a position near the center of the room and checked his watch. 8:53, 7 minutes. He spent those 7 minutes not speaking to anyone, which was deliberate. He would not walk into whatever this was looking like. He needed reassurance from subordinates. He stood straight and waited and kept his face the way he'd practiced. At exactly 9 o'clock, the ballroom's main doors opened. There were 4 men who came first, not in uniforms, in clothes that were good and dark and utterly without decoration, and they moved the way men move when their job is to be aware of every single thing in a room simultaneously. They took positions at the corners. Nobody said anything. Nobody would have said anything. Then Damien Viscari walked in. Trevor had researched him on the drive over. He'd known the name. Everyone in Chicago business knew the name, but he'd pulled specifics on his phone at red lights. The Viscari family. Old money with dirty roots that had been, over 2 decades, partially legitimized through real estate, hospitality, shipping logistics, and private equity. Damien specifically had been investigated twice by federal authorities and charged with nothing. He donated to hospitals. He appeared at mayoral fundraisers. He was, in the language of the city's power structure, complicated, which was the polite word for things that everyone understood but nobody said directly. What the articles hadn't prepared Trevor for was the specific quality of the man's presence. Damien Viscari was not particularly tall. He was not physically imposing in the way the word imposing usually gets used. He wore a black suit, no tie, a white shirt open one button at the collar, and he moved through the ballroom without looking at anyone specifically, and yet somehow made every person in it feel individually seen. He carried nothing. He had no phone in his hand. He didn't check his watch. He walked to the front of the room, stood behind no podium, and faced them. The silence was immediate and absolute. "Good morning," he said. His voice was even, moderate in volume, and it carried to the back of the room without effort. "I'll keep this brief. I bought this hotel last night. That's not a rumor. The transaction is complete. What happens next depends on what we find when we look carefully at how this hotel has been run. That process starts today." He paused. Not for dramatic effect, or if it was the kind of dramatic effect that didn't know it was trying. "I want to be clear about one thing up front. I'm not here to destroy what's been built. Good hotels are built by good people doing good work consistently over time. If that's what's happened here, the transition will be smooth. If it isn't—" Another pause, brief and precise. "Then we'll make adjustments." Trevor felt the word adjustments land somewhere in his sternum and lodge there. "There will be a specific item addressed this morning," Damien continued. "After that, individual department reviews begin. If you're called, cooperate fully and honestly. That's all." He stepped back slightly. One of the dark-clothed men near the door moved to a laptop that had been set up on a table to the side, and the ballroom's presentation screen, usually used for quarterly reviews and holiday planning sessions, came to life. The footage was high definition. The timestamp in the corner read the previous evening. The ballroom watched Nia Holloway walk into the Grand Monarch Hotel. Trevor saw himself on that screen, and his first instinct, trained, professional, intact, was to hold his expression still. He watched. He watched the desk agent's flicker of hesitation. He watched himself approach. He watched the conversation from an angle the surveillance camera had captured without mercy, high, wide, catching everything, including the precise quality of his own gaze when he first looked at Nia. It caught the things that felt internal, that felt private, that felt like they existed only inside his own reasoning. The camera made them external. It put them where 46 other people in the room could see them. He watched the champagne. He heard the slow clap. He watched Nia walk out into the rain. Nobody in the ballroom spoke. The footage ended. The screen went dark. Damien looked at Trevor. "Come up here, please." Trevor walked to the front of the room. His jaw was set. His posture was correct. He was not going to perform guilt in front of his staff. That was not who he was. "Tell everyone," Damien said quietly, "why you removed her from the hotel." The room waited. Trevor had maybe 4 seconds to make a decision that would define everything that followed, and he made the wrong one. Not because he panicked. He didn't panic. He made it because somewhere inside him, past all the training and the practiced expressions and the years of building himself into a man who was certain of his own judgment, he still believed he had been right. "I acted on what I observed," he said. "This hotel serves a particular clientele. Part of my responsibility is ensuring that our guests' experience isn't disrupted by situations that—" "What situations?" Damien said. "That fall outside the expected parameters of—" "What situations, Mr. Langford? Specifically?" Trevor stopped. He looked at Damien. He looked at the 46 faces watching him. He said, "She didn't present in a way consistent with the reservation she claimed." The silence that followed was different from the silence before. This one had texture. "She had a confirmed reservation," Damien said. "She had a corporate account. She had identification. She had a confirmation number. Which of those things was inconsistent?" Trevor said nothing. "Which of those things," Damien said, still quiet, still even, the kind of voice that never had to get louder because it already occupied the whole room, "was the problem?" Another silence. And then Trevor said it. He said it because he had built his entire professional identity on never backing down, on never conceding a position under pressure, and because backing down now felt like a kind of death he wasn't prepared to accept in front of witnesses. She didn't look like someone who belonged here. Someone in the room made a sound, a small sound, involuntary, the kind of thing that escapes before a person can stop it. Damien looked at Trevor for a long, measured moment. Then he turned to the gray-suited man on his right and nodded once. Trevor was escorted from the room within 45 seconds. Not roughly, efficiently. 2 men from his flanks, a direction toward the door, no discussion. He was given time to retrieve his personal effects from his office later, under supervision. His keycard was deactivated before he reached the elevator. His parking spot was reassigned before he reached his car. The speed of it was the most frightening part. The speed communicated something that shouting and confrontation never could, that the decision had been made long before this morning, that the morning itself was merely the execution of something already complete. In the ballroom, Damien addressed the remaining 46 people. What happened last night was not a policy failure. Policies didn't do that. People did. We are going to find out, in the next 72 hours, how many people made similar decisions in this hotel. To guests, to staff, over the past several years. He looked across the room slowly. Anyone who genuinely does not know what they would have done differently in Mr. Langford's position last night should consider that carefully and come speak to us voluntarily. It will go better. He left without ceremony. By 10:15 that morning, Damien's communications team had released a statement confirming the acquisition and announcing a temporary operational review. By 11, 3 local news stations had picked it up. By noon, it had been picked up nationally, attached to cell phone footage someone had taken in the lobby the night before. Shaky, partially obscured, but unmistakably showing a woman being walked out of a luxury hotel in the rain while people nearby laughed. The headline that ran on the cable news crawl by early afternoon read, "New hotel owner fires manager hours after buying property. Footage shows woman removed from luxury hotel amid discrimination allegations. Twitter, or whatever it was called now, caught fire by 1 p.m. Nia found out through a text message from her program coordinator, Deshawn, who sent a link with no context at 11:43 in the morning and then called her 30 seconds later because he was constitutionally incapable of waiting for anything. "You need to look at this right now." "I'm in a meeting, Deshawn." "Nia, right now." She excused herself, stepped into the hallway of the Southside Community Center where she worked most mornings, and opened the link on her phone. She read it once, fast. Then she went back to the top and read it again, slowly, with the particular careful attention she applied to situations that didn't make immediate sense. Her first feeling was not vindication. It was dread. She called Deshawn back. "Who talked to the press? Who released the video?" "Nobody from us. It was bystander footage, looks like. It was already circulating before the news picked it up." "Does my name appear in any of the coverage?" A pause. "Not yet. They're calling you the woman in the footage. But, Nia, people are going to figure it out. The confirmation was under your corporate account. Someone's going to connect that." She leaned against the hallway wall and looked at the water-stained ceiling tile directly above her. The organization she ran depended on discretion with the same urgency that most organizations depended on funding. The women she sheltered were hiding from people who had resources and motivation to find them. Her name in the news, her face in the news, attached to the Grand Monarch Hotel, attached to a story this large, this fast. There was a problem with dimensions she was still calculating. And then her phone rang from an unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail. She didn't, for a reason she couldn't have articulated. Something in the rhythm of the ring, maybe. Something that felt deliberate rather than random. "Ms. Holloway." The voice was the same even register she would have recognized immediately if she'd ever heard it before. She hadn't. But there was something about its quality, its quietness, its precision, that made her stand up straighter without deciding to. "Who is this?" "My name is Damien Vescari. I apologize for calling without introduction. I own the hotel you visited last night." Silence. "I'm aware of who you are," she said carefully. "I want that to be clear up front," he said. Because I think you may have a reasonable concern about why I'm calling, and I don't want to waste your time with misdirection. I'm not calling to offer you money. I'm not calling to manage the story. I'm calling because I believe you're owed something that can't be mailed to you, and I'd like the opportunity to make it right in a way that's your choice. She waited. She was good at waiting. There's going to be a formal acknowledgement, he said, a public one at the hotel, with every person present who witnessed what happened. Not a press conference, not a performance. What I have in mind is something smaller and specific. I would like you there, if you choose to be. If you choose not to be, I'll respect that completely, and this call ends however you want it to. You bought a hotel, she said slowly, overnight, because of what happened to me. Yes. She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose. That's an extraordinary overreaction. There was a pause. And then, very quietly, something that might have been a laugh, not performed, not polished, something that seemed to escape him the way that sound had escaped someone in the ballroom earlier that morning. Probably, he said. I don't want money, she said. I know. I don't want a settlement or a press statement with my name on it, or anything that draws more attention to... She stopped. She was saying too much to someone she didn't know, even if she knew his name. Even if she could infer, from the speed of everything that had happened since last night, the specific weight of what this man was capable of. I understand discretion, he said. I practice it for different reasons than you do. But I understand it. Another silence, different from the ones before. Not an absence of communication, but a kind of careful taking of measure. 2 people deciding simultaneously how much to trust what they were hearing. How did you know my name? She asked. The reservation was under your corporate account. That's how you knew my name. That's not how you knew to call. A longer pause. We can discuss that at another time, if you're willing. I'd rather earn that conversation than explain it on a cold call. She should have said no. Every practical instinct she'd developed over 10 years of running an organization that kept secrets to keep people alive told her to say no. Hang up. Let the story run its course at a distance. She was not equipped for proximity to someone like Damien Viscari. That proximity had costs she couldn't fully anticipate, and in her line of work, unanticipated costs had a way of becoming catastrophic. She said, I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking. She ended the call and stood in the hallway for a moment, and then went back into the meeting she'd left and sat down and contributed nothing useful for the remaining 20 minutes, because her mind was somewhere else entirely. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, had no way of knowing yet, was that 52 blocks north of where she was sitting, in the temporary offices the Viscari group had established in a midtown high-rise, 3 men were watching the mounting news coverage of the Grand Monarch story with expressions that ranged from concern to something considerably darker. Ellison Hargrove, the man who had sold the hotel the night before, sold it fast and without sufficient due diligence, because the offer had been extraordinary, and the pressure behind the offer had been the kind of pressure that communicated urgency in ways that didn't require explicit statement, was on the phone with his attorney. His attorney was telling him the sale was clean, the documentation was legitimate, there was nothing to contest. But Ellison Hargrove hadn't built his real estate portfolio by accepting clean and legitimate at face value. He knew what it looked like when someone wanted something badly enough to move fast and pay premium, and he knew that such wanting always had a reason underneath it. He had sold without finding out the reason. That bothered him now in ways it hadn't bothered him at midnight. The 2 men with him were former associates from the hotel's investment structure. One was named Carver. The other was named Philip Rourke, and he had spent 11 years channeling money through the Grand Monarch's hospitality accounts in ways that required the hotel's management to be specifically incurious. And Trevor Langford's specific incuriosity had been one of the most reliable features of his arrangement. That arrangement was now suddenly and catastrophically exposed to a new owner who was, by all available evidence, conducting a thorough operational review. Philip Rourke was not a man who responded to exposure with acceptance. It's a problem, Carver said, looking at the news feed on his phone. It's a solvable problem, Rourke said. He said it the way men say things when they're deciding something rather than observing it. Ellison Hargrove looked at both of them and felt the specific chill of realizing, too late, the precise nature of the room he was in. 3 floors below the community center where Nia Holloway was sitting in her meeting, a black SUV with no plates sat parked on the cross street, engine off, and had been there since 10:17 that morning, 40 minutes before Damien's people had tracked it and flagged it. The city was accelerating around all of them, and what had started the previous evening as one woman being walked out of a hotel in the rain was becoming, with the speed and inevitability of something that had always been heading this direction, something that none of them, not Nia, not Damien, not Trevor in his suddenly emptied-out morning, not Rourke in his backroom calculation, could stop or slow or step sideways from anymore. The point of no return, it turned out, had already passed. They just hadn't all been told yet. The black SUV with no plates was still parked on the cross street at 2:17 in the afternoon when Marcus Teal, one of Damien's surveillance coordinators, sent the photo to the secure channel with a single line of text beneath it. Third rotation, same vehicle. Driver change at noon. They're watching the building. Damien received the message in the back of the same armored limousine, now parked in a private bay beneath the Midtown high-rise his team had requisitioned for the week. He looked at the photo for exactly 4 seconds. Then he forwarded it to a separate channel with one word appended: identify. The answer came back in 11 minutes, which was fast even by his standards, which meant whoever had run the plates, or the lack of plates, which was itself information, had access to something deeper than public records. The vehicle was registered to a shell company, dissolved 14 months ago, incorporated in Delaware, with a forwarding address that traced to a mail facility in Wilmington. The dissolution date was interesting. The timing was interesting. 14 months ago placed it inside a specific window that Damien's financial analyst, a small, precise woman named Wren, had been quietly mapping since early that morning. Wren knocked on the partition between the rear compartment and the front at 2:31 and Damien lowered it. "Tell me," he said. She held a tablet. She had the specific energy of someone who had been awake too long and found something they weren't entirely comfortable having found. The Grand Monarch's hospitality accounts. I've been running through the acquisition documentation and the financial history the Hargrove Group's attorneys provided during the overnight negotiations. And there's a pattern in the operational accounts going back approximately 9 years. Quarterly transfers, always structured just below federal reporting thresholds, always routed through a subsidiary account registered to a vendor called Meridian Hospitality Solutions. Meridian Hospitality Solutions doesn't have a website. It doesn't have a physical office. It filed taxes for 3 years and then stopped. She paused. The amounts are not small. How not small? Across 9 years, approximately $22 million moved through accounts directly connected to the Grand Monarch's operational budget. The documentation makes it look like vendor payments, maintenance contracts, linen supply, event staffing. But the vendors don't exist, or they exist only on paper, and the money, when I trace it as far as I can, moves into a series of accounts that eventually route to private holding structures in the Cayman Islands, and in one case, directly to a personal account belonging to a Philip Rourke. Damien was quiet for a moment. "How long have you known this name?" "I pulled it about 40 minutes ago. I wanted to verify before I brought it to you." "Rourke," he said. Not a question. The name had a texture for him, not because he knew it specifically, but because he recognized the category of it. Men who embedded themselves in legitimate structures and used those structures as pipes for money that couldn't travel in the light. "There's one more thing," Wren said. She scrolled on the tablet and turned it toward him. The Meridian accounts received authorization signatures on all major transfers. The signatures belonged to a mid-level finance manager at the hotel, whose name doesn't appear in any current staff roster. She resigned 18 months ago. But the more recent transfers, the last 6 spanning 14 months, don't have her signature. They have someone else's. Damien looked at the name on the tablet. He looked at it for a long time. "That's not possible," he said quietly. Not because it wasn't, but because its possibility had specific consequences that expanded rapidly in his mind the longer he looked at the name. The signature on the last 14 months of fraudulent transfers belonged to a woman named Carla Voss. Carla Voss was, until 6 weeks ago, the chief financial administrator for a nonprofit organization called Holloway Foundations, LLC, Nia's organization. Damien closed the tablet cover and handed it back to Ren, and sat in the silence of the rear compartment for a moment that felt longer than it was. His jaw was not tight. He had passed the stage of physical tension. What replaced it was something colder and more dangerous. The specific stillness of a man reorganizing everything he thought he knew into a new configuration and not liking the shape it made. "Who else has seen this?" he asked. "Nobody. I came directly to you. Keep it that way until I tell you otherwise." Ren left. The partition went back up. Damien sat alone and thought. He was very good at thinking in conditions that would have paralyzed other people. It was perhaps the thing he was best at, and he took no particular pride in it because it had been necessary for survival rather than achievement. He thought about Carla Voss. He thought about the timing, 14 months of signatures ending 6 weeks ago. He thought about why a financial administrator would resign from a nonprofit with Naya's resources rather than be terminated. He thought about the black SUV with no plates parked outside a community center on the south side. He picked up his phone and called a number he rarely called in sequence with other calls, because he preferred to compartmentalize. The man who answered was named Boyle, and he had spent 20 years doing research for people who needed answers that didn't appear in publicly accessible databases. "Carla Voss," Damien said, "former CFO of Holloway Foundations. Find her today." He ended the call and made another, this one to Marcus. "The SUV outside the community center. I want to know the moment it moves, and I want someone inside that building, not visible, not known, within the next 30 minutes. He ended that call and sat back and looked at the ceiling of the limousine and understood, with the cold clarity that had kept him alive for 20 years in circumstances that killed more careless men, that the situation he was now in had layers that hadn't been visible 48 hours ago. He had acted from something uncomplicated. Someone who deserved dignity hadn't received it, and he had the means to respond. It had felt, in the moment, like one of the cleanest decisions he had ever made. It was not a clean situation. And Nia Holloway, whether she knew it or not, was standing in the middle of something considerably more dangerous than a hotel discrimination story. He needed to know which of those two possibilities was true, whether she knew or she didn't, before he spoke to her again, because everything depended on it, and he was not willing to be wrong about this one. Nia left the community center at 4:15 and walked 2 blocks to her car, which was a 7-year-old Civic with a slow leak in the rear left tire that she kept meaning to address. She drove south on King Drive with the radio off, her phone on the passenger seat, and the specific quiet of someone processing something in parallel with the act of driving. The call from Damien Vescari had sat inside her all afternoon like a stone she kept turning over. Not because it was unwelcome or because she distrusted it categorically. She had spent 10 years developing a functional instinct about who could be trusted with what, and that instinct wasn't ringing any clean alarm about him. What it was doing instead was something more complicated. It was noting that she couldn't fully see the shape of his interest yet, and she was uncomfortable proceeding without being able to see shapes. She pulled into the alley behind the community center's annex building, a separate facility 3 blocks from the main center, which housed the administrative operations of Holloway Foundations, and where she had been planning to spend the evening reviewing the quarterly reports her board was expecting in 2 weeks. She used her key on the back door. The hallway was dim because she hadn't replaced 2 bulbs and kept forgetting. She climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, unlocked the office door, pushed it open, and stopped. Deshawn was already there. He was standing at her desk rather than sitting at it, which was the first wrong thing. He was standing with his arms at his sides, and his face had an expression she had never seen on him before in 6 years of working together. Not afraid exactly, but past afraid, somewhere on the other side of it, where fear becomes a kind of numbness. Across from him, sitting in one of the 2 chairs in front of her desk, with her coat still on, was Carla Voss. Nia hadn't seen Carla in 6 weeks. Since the morning she had accepted Carla's resignation letter across this same desk, a resignation that Carla had delivered quietly and with an explanation about personal circumstances and family obligations that Nia had accepted with some sadness, because Carla had been with her for 4 years and was competent in ways that were hard to replace. She had accepted it, and wished her well and thought about it periodically in the weeks since as an administrative inconvenience. She was looking at Carla Voss now, and something about the way the woman was sitting, the stiffness, the two still hands, the way she looked at Naya when she came in with an expression of someone who has been waiting for a moment they've been dreading, restructured the memory of that resignation into something different. "Close the door," Carla said. Nia closed the door. She did not move to her desk. She stood near the door and looked at both of them and said very quietly, "What's happening?" Deshawn opened his mouth and Carla said, "Let me," and he closed it. "I need to tell you something," Carla said. "I need to tell you all of it, and I need you to let me finish before you... I just need you to let me finish." Nia said nothing. She waited. She put her keys on the filing cabinet to her left and crossed her arms and waited. Carla said, "The quarterly accounts, the Meridian transfers." Nia felt something shift, not dramatically. There was no dramatic shift available to her right now because she didn't have context for what those words meant in sequence. What she felt was a narrowing, a focusing, the same sensation she got in conversations when a direction became suddenly and irreversibly clear. "What about them?" she said. "I need to explain how it started," Carla said, "because if I just give you the number without context, you'll..." "Carla," Nia's voice was very steady. "What about the Meridian transfers?" Carla looked at her hands. Then she looked up. "I authorized 9 of them, over 14 months. The total amount that passed through accounts connected to the Foundation's operational structure is approximately..." She stopped. She took a breath. "Approximately $400,000. The room was very quiet. $400,000, Naya repeated. "I didn't keep it," Carla said, and there was something raw and specific in how fast she said that. The particular urgency of someone distinguishing between bad and worse. "I need you to know that. I didn't keep any of it. I was told, I was given to understand, that the accounts were legitimate, that the Meridian structure was a financial vehicle that the Grand Monarch had been using for years, and that adding the Foundation's authorization signatures was, that it was a formality, that it was..." "Who told you that?" Silence. "Carla, who told you?" Carla looked at her hands again. "A man named Philip Rourke. He was introduced to me at a fundraising event 18 months ago. He presented himself as a hospitality investor. He said he had a partnership opportunity for the Foundation, legitimate grant money, he called it, through a hospitality social enterprise structure. He said the paperwork was complex but legal." She paused. "He was very convincing. And you signed." Yes. I signed the transfer authorizations 9 times over 14 months. Without telling me." Carla's jaw moved. "He told me it was a compliance issue, that if it went through official channels, it would trigger a federal review of the Foundation's nonprofit status and the grant would be lost. He said it was a timing issue, a paperwork technicality, and that once the grant cleared, I could brief you on the full structure." She stopped. "I know how it sounds. I know. 6 weeks ago I realized. I went back through everything and I realized what I had actually signed, what those accounts actually were, and I..." Her voice broke just once, then steadied. "I panicked. I resigned. I thought if I removed myself it would somehow... I don't know what I thought. I wasn't thinking clearly." Nia uncrossed her arms. She walked to the window and stood with her back to both of them for approximately 10 seconds, which was the amount of time it took to understand the full dimension of what she was being told. $400,000 in fraudulent transfers, authorized through her Foundation's accounts, connected to the Grand Monarch Hotel, connected to a man named Philip Rourke, who was, she understood this without needing it explained, connected to whatever financial structure was now being exposed by the Viscari acquisition. The story that had been about a hotel and a woman in the rain and a fired manager was actually about this. Or had become about this, or had always been about this, and she was only now finding the seam between what she'd thought was happening and what was actually happening. She turned around. "Where's the money now?" she asked. "I don't know. Truly, I don't know. Once it went into the Meridian accounts, I had no visibility. Are the Foundation's operating accounts compromised? The shelter accounts? The emergency housing?" "No," Carla said quickly. "No, those are completely separate. I made sure..." The accounts that Rourke had access to were operational expense accounts that I administered separately. The program accounts are clean. I verified that before I came here. Before you came here, Nia said. You verified the accounts were clean before you came to tell me what you'd done to them. The particular quality of silence that followed that sentence was one of those terrible human silences, the kind that doesn't communicate a lack of something to say, but an excess of it, an entire avalanche of words rendered unnecessary by the precision of what had just been said. Deshawn, who had been a still and silent witness to all of this, sat down slowly in the other chair, as though his legs had made a decision his brain hadn't caught up with yet. Nia went to her desk. She sat down. She put both hands flat on the surface and looked at them for a moment. Then she looked at Carla. I'm going to ask you one more question, she said, and I need you to understand that whatever the answer is, the answer you give me right now is the only chance you have of me not picking up that phone and making a call that ends with you in a federal building. Carla nodded. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She was holding it by some specific act of will. Did you tell anyone I was going to the Grand Monarch last Tuesday? Nia asked. The silence that followed lasted long enough that it was its own answer. Carla. Rourke called me, Carla said. The words came out stripped of everything except the facts, because anything else would have required energy she didn't have left. 3 weeks ago, he said he'd heard I had resigned from the foundation. He said there was going to be an audit of the Meridian accounts, and that my signatures were going to surface, and that if I cooperated with him, he could make sure the documentation pointed somewhere else, away from me. She paused. He asked me if I knew anything about your schedule, your movements. I told him about the Grand Monarch. You'd mentioned it in passing when you confirmed the reservation. I told him the date and the time. Nia sat very still. She sat very still for a long time. He arranged it, she said finally. Not a question. I think so. I think the people at the hotel, I think Trevor Langford was paid to, Stop. Nia held up one hand. Stop talking. She needed Carla to stop talking because she needed to think, and she needed to think without the sound of more information collapsing on top of what was already there. She needed to understand the architecture of what had just been revealed, because it was one thing to be humiliated in a hotel lobby. Terrible, dehumanizing, something she had processed and filed and was learning to carry. It was another thing entirely to understand that the humiliation had been arranged, that someone had paid for it, or engineered it, or used it as a mechanism for something she still couldn't fully see. Why? That was the question underneath everything. Why would Philip Rourke arrange for her to be publicly humiliated at the Grand Monarch Hotel? And then, with a slowness that was worse than instantaneous understanding, it came to her. He hadn't been targeting her. He had been targeting anyone who might investigate the Grand Monarch's accounts. And if Nia Holloway, whose foundation's operational accounts had unwittingly been used as a laundering vehicle, started asking questions about the hotel, started pulling on financial threads that connected to Meridian, the cleanest way to neutralize her wasn't to threaten her. It was to destroy her credibility, make her the subject of a discrimination story, make her look like someone with a grievance against the hotel, make any claim she made about its financial impropriety look like retaliation, like a woman with an axe to grind rather than a witness with evidence. Except something had gone wrong with the plan. The plan had been seen by a man in an armored limousine, and that man had responded in a way that nobody, not Rourke, not Langford, not anyone involved in this, had anticipated or prepared for. The plan to neutralize Nia Holloway had instead handed Damien Viscari ownership of the Grand Monarch Hotel and put him in direct contact with her. And now Damien Viscari was conducting an operational review of accounts that contained approximately $22 million worth of evidence against Philip Rourke. Rourke knew this. That was what the black SUV outside the community center was about. Nia stood up. She was moving before she'd consciously decided to move, the specific locomotion of someone whose body had processed a threat while their mind was still catching up. Both of you, she said, need to leave this building right now. Deshawn stood immediately. He had always trusted her instincts faster than he trusted his own. Carla looked confused, then looked at Nia's face and stood. Where are we going? Deshawn asked. Separately, Nia said. You go out the front. Carla, you go down through the basement and out the side door onto Wentworth. Don't go home tonight. Go somewhere nobody who knows you would think to look. Nia, what is... There's a car parked 2 blocks from the main building that has been there since this morning, she said. I don't know exactly what they want yet, but I know it's connected to everything that Carla just told me, and I know that this building is not safe right now. Carla stood. She was gripping her bag with both hands. I'm so sorry, she said. Nia, I know that's not... I know, Nia said. Go. They went. Nia stood alone in the office for approximately 40 seconds. She was calculating. She was very good at calculating under pressure. She had built her organization in conditions that required clear thinking inside chaos, had made decisions about where to move women in the middle of the night with creditors and worse people looking for them, had learned to treat fear as information rather than instruction. She picked up her phone. She found the unknown number from earlier. She called it. It rang once. I was about to call you, Damien said. I know about the Meridian accounts, she said. I know about Carla Voss. I know about Philip Rourke. And I need you to tell me right now, honestly, without any of the careful language from this afternoon, how much danger am I in? A pause. Brief. More than you were an hour ago. The car outside the community center. My people have been watching it since this morning. It hasn't moved, but there was a second vehicle that we picked up 20 minutes ago near your home address. Her home address. The air in the room went very still. How do they have my home address? The same way they had your schedule last Tuesday, he said. Someone gave it to them. She understood then, with the totality of understanding that comes when the last piece settles into place and the full picture appears, that she had been wrong about the shape of her danger. She had been thinking about financial exposure, about her foundation's legal risk, about the reputational damage of the story metastasizing in ways she couldn't control. She had not been thinking about the second car parked near her home. She had not been thinking about the specific category of men who put 2 cars near a woman when they felt cornered. What do you need from me? Damien asked. She pressed her back against the wall beside the window, angled so she could see the street below without being visible from it. The way she had taught herself to stand in situations that had taught her this stance was sometimes necessary. And Nia Holloway, who had spent 10 years helping other women disappear to safety, understood that she had just become the kind of woman her own organization existed to protect, except that the resources she normally called upon, the networks and the safe houses and the quiet logistics of moving someone out of harm's reach, were now themselves potentially compromised, potentially watched, potentially the exact thing she could not use without leading the wrong people directly to the people she had built her life to shelter. Everything she was, everything she had built, had just become the weapon pointed at her. I need you to tell me, she said, her voice steady in the way that things are steady when steadiness is the only option remaining, that you have a secure location that nobody connected to Philip Rourke has any knowledge of. The pause on the other end of the line was 3 seconds long. I have several, Damien said. Then I need to not be in this building in the next 10 minutes, she said. And I need whatever you're going to do about Rourke to happen fast, because if it doesn't happen fast... She stopped, because from her angle at the window she had just seen the black SUV from outside the community center turn the corner onto her block. It had moved. It had moved, which meant they weren't watching anymore. They were... The SUV turned the corner slowly, not fast. That was the thing that made it worse. Fast would have meant panic, improvisation, someone losing their nerve. Slow meant deliberate. Slow meant they had already decided what happened next and were simply arriving at the time and place where it would occur. Nia was already moving. She grabbed her phone, her keys, her portfolio. The portfolio first because it had the Foundation's emergency contact list and the encrypted drive and 3 things she could not reconstruct from memory under pressure. And she was out the office door and into the stairwell before she had consciously sequenced the decision. Her body had made the calculation. Her body was sometimes smarter than her mind in situations like this, because her mind wanted to understand things fully before acting, and her body just wanted to keep breathing. I'm moving, she said into the phone. Now. Which exit? Damien's voice. Flat, focused, no wasted syllables. Basement, side door onto Wentworth. There's a gray Tahoe already on Wentworth. Driver's name is Cole. He knows your face. Don't get into anything else. She was on the second landing. How does he know my face? I sent him your photo an hour ago. Go. She went. The basement of the annex building was used for supply storage. Folding tables, stacked chairs, donation boxes full of winter coats, cleaning equipment. One bare overhead bulb. The smell of concrete and cardboard, and the faint chemical sweetness of industrial detergent. She moved through it in near dark, her hand trailing the wall, her eyes adjusting, her breathing deliberate. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. She had learned that from a woman she'd sheltered 3 years ago, a woman who had escaped a situation that made Nia's current one look manageable, and who had taught her that controlled breathing was the difference between moving fast and moving smart. The side door had a push bar. She put one hand flat against it, stopped, listened. Nothing from outside, or nothing she could hear through a steel door. She pushed. Cold air. The alley on Wentworth, narrow, lit by a single street lamp at the far end. A dumpster to her left. Darkness between buildings. And 15 feet to her right, a gray Tahoe sitting with its engine running and its lights off. She walked to it. The passenger window was down before she reached it. The driver was perhaps 50, wide through the shoulders, with a face that had been broken and repaired at least twice in a way that hadn't quite restored the original symmetry. He looked at her once with the specific quality of someone checking a box rather than assessing a stranger. Miss Holloway. Cole? Get in. She got in. The door closed. The Tahoe moved before she had finished pulling her seatbelt, out of the alley, turning north, steady speed, nothing that would draw attention from anyone watching for a vehicle trying to leave quickly. The SUV from my street, she said. Stationary now, parked in front of your building. One more behind it that came from the east. 2 in the front, 1 in the back of each vehicle. He checked his mirror without turning his head. Not police. I know they're not police. Mr. Vescari is already aware. He's been coordinating since you called. She looked out the passenger window at the south side moving past her. Corner stores, 2 flats, a laundromat with its lights still on, a man walking a dog who had no idea what was happening 20 feet from him, and she thought about the women in the safe houses. The ones she could not call right now because her phone might be monitored. The ones whose locations were protected by the specific condition of nobody knowing who to ask. The architecture of secrecy she had built for other people was now, she realized, the only thing standing between those people and whatever Rourke was willing to do to contain what he knew. He had used her foundation as a channel. That meant he had intelligence on the foundation's structure. How much intelligence was the question she couldn't answer, and the range of possible answers was the thing sitting on her chest, making it harder to breathe evenly. Cole's phone buzzed. He glanced at it once, then said, without inflection, "Change of destination. Mr. Vescari wants you at the Monarch." The hotel? Directly. Why? He didn't say why. He said to tell you it was his call and you could argue with him when you got there. She almost laughed. It was a strange moment to almost laugh, which was probably why the impulse arose, the body finding an exit valve when the pressure got to a certain level. "Fine," she said. They drove north. Philip Rourke was not a man who had ever needed to do his own dirty work. This was a point of professional identity for him, a thing he considered a sign of intelligence rather than cowardice. The most effective operators, in his experience, were the ones who maintained the maximum possible distance between themselves and the direct consequences of their decisions. He had maintained that distance for 11 years. It had served him extremely well. He was currently in the back of Ellison Hargrove's town car, and he was discovering that distance, as a concept, had begun to collapse. "The Vescari review," Carver said from the seat across from him, "has already pulled the Meridian account documentation. Ren Nakamura, she's his financial analyst. She's been running traces since this morning. We have confirmation from inside the hotel's accounting department. The inside contact is gone. She received a message 30 minutes ago that her position was under immediate review and she was instructed not to access any systems until further notice." Rourke looked at his phone. Then he looked at the window. He had the specific expression of a man watching a timeline accelerate past the point where contingencies still applied. Where's the Voss woman? Uncontactable since approximately 5:30 this evening. She met with Holloway. I know she met with Holloway. That's why I'm asking where she is. Carver's face communicated that uncontactable meant what it meant. Rourke put his phone in his coat pocket. He thought for a moment. The teams outside the foundation building. Holloway left the building. One of the teams tracked her vehicle, or tracked what they thought was her vehicle, north on King Drive, but lost it near the expressway interchange. Lost it. Yes. 6 men in 2 vehicles lost 1 woman in a Civic. Carver said nothing. The town car was quiet for a moment. She's going to the hotel, Rourke said. It wasn't a guess. It was the kind of deduction that arrives when you've thought through someone else's logic for long enough. Viscari called her this afternoon. She's been running the same calculation I've been running. She knows the accounts. She knows what Voss told her. She goes to Viscari because Viscari has resources and she needs them. And Viscari goes to Viscari because... He stopped. Because what? Carver said. Rourke looked at him. Because he's personally invested in her, in a way I didn't account for. This was the thing that had been gnawing at Rourke since the news coverage broke that morning. The purchase price, the speed, the public firing. None of it was rational business behavior. None of it mapped to any investment logic he understood. Damian Viscari had paid $500 million for a property he apparently had no prior interest in, within hours of a discrimination incident that involved a woman running a nonprofit on the South Side. The financial structure of the transaction was clean and genuine. It was not a cover. It was not a money vehicle. It had been a legitimate acquisition made at extraordinary speed for what appeared to be a personal reason. Men who acted from personal reasons were, in Rourke's experience, the most dangerous kind, because their decisions didn't follow the logic that could be predicted and countered. We need the gala, Rourke said. Carver looked at him. The reopening... Viscari is planning a charity event at the Monarch. Reopening gala, day after tomorrow. It's been in the press since this afternoon. He looked out the window at the city moving past. Every significant business figure in Chicago will be there. Media, cameras, the story of the hotel, Viscari's story, will be at its most visible, its most public. You want to hit him at his most public moment. I want to destroy the story before it becomes something I can't survive. If the Grand Monarch's reopening ends in chaos, if the accounts, the investigation, the Holloway connection surfaces in the wrong order, in the wrong light, I can shape the narrative. I can be the man who brought evidence of financial corruption to light rather than the man the evidence points to. He paused. But only if I move first. Carver was quiet for a moment. And Holloway? Rourke said, she's the thread. Everything unravels if she talks in the right sequence to the right people. He looked at Carver with the specific directness of a man communicating something he preferred not to state explicitly. The gala is in 40 hours. I need the foundation building's data systems cleaned before midnight tonight, and I need someone at that gala who understands what I'm asking without me having to explain it. Carver nodded. Once. Neither of them said the rest of it out loud. It didn't need to be said out loud. It just needed to be understood. The Grand Monarch Hotel was lit up at 9 in the evening as if it had never had a bad night in its 42-story history. The lobby was operating at reduced capacity. The operational review had slowed bookings, but the staff who remained moved through their work with what Nia immediately clocked, walking through the brass doors at 9:14 as something different from what she'd seen 2 nights ago. It was harder to name than fear or caution. It was closer to attention. The specific quality of people doing their jobs as though the jobs actually meant something. She was met in the lobby by a woman named Priya, who introduced herself as Viscari's operations coordinator and walked her to an elevator without small talk, which Nia appreciated. The 28th floor was where the hotel's executive suite ran. Not the presidential suite she'd originally booked, but the operational level, conference rooms and administrative offices, and a corner room that had been converted into a temporary command space with a view of the city on 2 sides, and a conference table covered in laptops and printed financial documents, and 2 people working in the focused silence of a deadline. Damien was standing at the window when she came in. He turned, and this was the first time she had seen him in person. Actually seen him, not inferred him from a phone call or a news photograph, and she understood immediately what the coverage had failed to communicate, which was that the photographs flattened something that the actual person possessed in 3 dimensions. He was not what she'd expected. She hadn't been sure what she'd expected. He looked like a man who carried significant weight in a way that had long since stopped being a burden and become simply a condition of existence. He looked tired, which surprised her. She hadn't anticipated that he would look tired. "You made it," he said. "Cole drives like someone who used to do something I don't want to know about," she said. Something moved across his face. Brief, controlled, real. "He did. Sit down." She sat at the conference table. He sat across from her, and Ren, the financial analyst, turned from her laptop. "Tell me what Carla Voss told you," Damien said. "All of it." She told him. She told it with precision, sequenced correctly without editorializing. She gave him the amounts, the dates, the description of how Rourke had approached Carla, the specific mechanism of the signature authorizations. She told him about the schedule, her reservation, Carla being contacted, the information being passed. She told it the way she told things when she needed the listener to have everything, which was the way she had learned to brief emergency situations in her organization. Facts first, implications second, questions at the end. When she finished, Damien was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Ren. "Match?" he said. "Matches completely," Ren said. "The amounts she's describing correspond to the transfers I traced this morning. The timeline matches, the structure matches." She paused. "It's actually better for us that Ms. Holloway has this, because it establishes that the Foundation's involvement was unwitting. If Rourke tries to use the account connections as leverage, he will try," Nia said. Both of them looked at her. "He already has people outside the Foundation building," she said. "He's not sending them to recover money. The money is already moved. He's trying to control what I know and when I say it, and to whom." She looked at Damien. "He thinks if he can get to my records, the Foundation's files, the paper trail showing what Carla signed and when, he can shape the story before the Vescari review shapes it first." "He can't get to those records," Damien said. "He's going to try tonight. The team's outside the building. They're not watching. They moved. Cole told me they're parked. That means they've already shifted from surveillance to action." Damien picked up his phone and was already talking before she finished the sentence, giving instructions in a register that was low and precise and communicated urgency without performing it. He made 3 calls in 4 minutes. The third one was longer and conducted partially in a language she didn't speak. While he was on the phone, Ren turned to her laptop and said, without looking up, "The gala." Nia looked at her. "What about it?" "We announced it this afternoon. Reopening charity event, day after tomorrow. Mr. Vescari planned it as the public-facing component of the transition. Good press, community investment, the right optics around the discrimination story." Ren's fingers moved on the keyboard. "I've been looking at the coverage since the announcement. There's a specific spike in engagement from accounts connected to 2 IP addresses in the last 90 minutes. She turned the laptop toward Naya. "These addresses trace to a communications company called Meridian Digital Solutions." Nia stared at the screen. "Meridian?" "Same naming pattern, different entity, different registration, but the naming pattern matters to people like Rourke. They use systems they trust. They reuse structures." She paused. "The engagement spike is too coordinated. It's not organic public interest. It's reconnaissance." Damien ended his last call. He looked at both of them. "The Foundation building is covered," he said. "My people are there. Nothing goes in and nothing comes out that I don't know about." "That's tonight," Naya said. "Rourke is thinking about the gala." "I know. If he can disrupt it, or if he can surface the Meridian connection in a way that ties my Foundation to his laundering scheme before you have the counter-narrative established." "I know," Damien said again, not dismissive, acknowledging. "So what's the plan?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment. "The plan involves you doing something you're not going to want to do." "Tell me." "I need you at the gala, publicly, visibly, with me, as the story everyone came to see. The woman who was wronged, and the ownership that made it right. I need that story to be the only story in that room. She absorbed this. You want to use me as a narrative shield. I want to give Rourke no oxygen, he said. The moment that story is established in front of every camera in Chicago, any version of events he tries to release becomes noise. But only if you're there. If you're absent, there's a vacuum, and he will fill it. She thought about the women in the safe houses. She thought about what visibility meant for her specifically, for the organization she had built on discretion. She thought about the way this had started, with a hotel room and a champagne stain, and where it had arrived, which was a 28th floor command center at 9:30 at night, with her picture already on national news and her foundation's accounts connected to a 9-year money laundering operation and 2 vehicles outside her building. She thought about how many times in the last 24 hours she had made the choice to move rather than wait. I'll be there, she said. Something in Damien's posture shifted, fractionally, barely perceptible. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she said. We still have 40 hours and a man with resources and nothing left to lose. What neither of them said, what occupied the space between the statement and what followed, was that 40 hours was both a long time and no time at all, depending entirely on what Rourke decided to spend it on. They found out at 11:47 that night. Marcus sent the alert to Damien's phone. The Foundation building's annex, the one on Wentworth, had its ground floor lock bypassed at 11:32. 2 men, in and out in 9 minutes. They did not take physical files. They accessed the server room in the basement and connected 2 devices to the network infrastructure before Damien's people, arriving within the 9-minute window, caught the second man on the way out. The first had already cleared the building. The device they recovered was a network bridge, something that would allow remote access to the Foundation's internal files and communication systems from an external location. Whoever had placed it would now have, or believed they had, the ability to monitor every digital communication the Foundation made, which meant Rourke now believed he had eyes inside Nia's operation, which meant he would act on that belief. Damien showed her the alert at 11:51. She read it twice. She sat with it. He thinks he has access, she said. He has partial access. The man we caught hadn't finished the installation, but he doesn't know that. She looked at him slowly. He thinks he can see everything. Yes. And he'll act on that. He'll plan around it. He'll believe he has intelligence he doesn't actually have. Damien looked at her with the specific expression of someone recognizing something. We can feed him information, she said, through the compromised access point. We can let him think he's seeing real communications, Gala logistics, my movements, your security arrangements, and we control every piece of it. It's a trap, Damien said. It's what he was going to do to me, she said. He used false structures and manufactured information to put me somewhere I could be neutralized. The same architecture works in reverse. Damien was quiet for 3 seconds. If it works. If it works, she agreed. If it doesn't, we walk into the gala and whatever he's planned walks in with us. And there are cameras and 600 people and no second chance. She held his gaze. Her voice was level. Her hands were still. I've been moving women out of reach of dangerous men for 10 years. I've built systems under pressure that didn't have the luxury of working halfway. This works, or everything I've built gets used against the people I built it for. She paused. So, it works. The city was a grid of lights below the window, 42 floors down, indifferent and vast and moving through its night the way cities move, continuous, without acknowledgement of the specific human urgencies happening at its various elevations. Damien looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Ren, start building the decoy communications. I want something in that system by 1 a.m. that looks real enough to be operational and wrong enough to walk Rourke directly into a position we control. Ren's fingers were already moving. In a hotel on the near north side, Philip Rourke received a message at midnight from the man who had installed the partial network bridge. The message said, Access confirmed. Foundation internal comms visible. Gala security layout incoming within the hour. Rourke read it and allowed himself the specific satisfaction of a man who believed he had just turned the corner on a situation that had been, for the past 20 hours, threatening to end him. He poured a drink. He sat in the chair by the window. He looked at the city and thought about how clean it would feel when this was finished, when Holloway was discredited, when the Vescari acquisition became mired in the corruption narrative he was preparing to release, when the gala became the occasion of a story about a billionaire crime figure using a discrimination incident to cover the acquisition of a money laundering property. He had the pieces. He had the access. He had 40 hours, and he believed, already seen the worst of what this situation could do to him. He had never been more wrong about anything in his life. 40 floors above him and 6 blocks east, in the temporary command room of the Grand Monarch Hotel, the trap was being built around him in real time, constructed from the materials of his own confidence, baited with exactly the intelligence he most needed to believe, designed by a woman who had spent a decade building invisible structures that kept people alive, and refined by a man who had spent 2 decades surviving in conditions that destroyed everyone who underestimated the territory. The gala was in 39 hours, and somewhere in the architecture of the plan taking shape in that room, Trevor Langford, bitter and humiliated, and newly contacted by a man named Carver, who had offered him something that felt, in his diminished state, dangerously close to a lifeline, was making a decision he would not understand the consequences of until it was far, far. Trevor Langford made the decision at 1:17 in the morning in the kitchen of his sister's apartment in Wicker Park, where he had been sleeping on a fold-out couch for 3 days because going back to his own condo felt like admitting something he wasn't ready to admit. Carver had called him at midnight. The offer was simple, presented in the specific language of men who deal in simple presentations of complicated things. Show up at the gala, access the hotel's backup server room using a key card he still technically possessed, because the deactivation had covered his primary access, but missed a secondary maintenance credential. Nobody had thought to audit, plant a device that would broadcast the financial documentation Rourke's team had prepared, the version of the Meridian account story that placed Holloway Foundations at the center rather than the periphery, across every screen and speaker system in the grand ballroom at the precise moment Damien Vescari was scheduled to make his public remarks. Destroy the story before the story destroyed what remained of Philip Rourke. And in exchange, Trevor's name would not appear in any of the documentation Rourke intended to release. His role in Langford's termination would be reframed as the vindictive overreach of a new owner with criminal connections. Trevor would be repositioned as a victim. He sat at his sister's kitchen table and turned the key card over in his fingers for 40 minutes. His sister was asleep. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator's hum and a car passing on the street below every few minutes, its headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling. He thought about the surveillance footage, about watching himself on that screen in the ballroom with 46 people around him, about the specific 2 seconds when he had looked at Nia Holloway in the lobby and made the calculation that lived in him so deep he hadn't even recognized it as a calculation. It had felt like instinct, like discernment, like the exercise of professional judgment. He had watched himself make it from the outside, from 30 feet away on a conference room screen, and for the first time in 3 days he let himself understand what it had actually been. Not professional judgment, not hotel standards, not protecting the brand. He sat with that understanding for a long time. It was not comfortable. It did not resolve into anything clean, it just sat in him like a stone that had always been there and had finally been turned over to reveal what lived beneath it. At 2:03 in the morning, Trevor Langford made a different call than the one Carver was expecting. He called the number that had been provided in the employment separation documentation, the number for the Vescari Group's transition operations contact. He asked for Damien Vescari directly. He was told that was not possible at this hour. He said he had information about a planned disruption of the reopening gala and that if Mr. Vescari wanted to hear it before it was too late, someone needed to wake him up. Someone did. Damien took the call in the command room, standing at the window with the city below him, and listened without interrupting for 4 minutes while Trevor told him everything. The call from Carver, the offer, the device, the secondary keycard credential, the specific server room location, the timing built around Damien's own remarks. He told it with the particular flatness of a man who has already decided that the telling itself is the only remaining transaction available to him, The only thing he can trade for something he can't name yet but needs nonetheless. When Trevor finished, Damien was quiet for 5 seconds. "The key card," he said. "You still have it?" "Yes." "Keep it. Don't contact Carver again. Don't go anywhere tonight." A pause. "Why are you telling me this?" The question sat in the line between them. Trevor said, "Because I watched that footage and I didn't recognize myself." He stopped. "And I'm not sure that's fixable, but this part is." "So." Another silence. "Stay where you are," Damien said. "Someone will contact you in the morning about how this proceeds." He ended the call. He stood at the window for a moment. Then he turned to the room where Ren was still working and Nia was reviewing the decoy communications they'd loaded into the compromised Foundation system, and he said, "We have the secondary access point. Rourke's people plan to use it at the gala. We now control the approach." Nia looked up from the laptop. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there in the lobby 2 nights ago, or maybe they had been, and the circumstances hadn't lit them the same way. "Trevor." "Yes." She absorbed this without visible reaction for a moment. Then she said, "What do you need him to do?" "Walk them in," Damien said. "If Carver believes Trevor is executing the plan, they won't send anyone else. They'll trust the access. One man rather than a team, and we control where he arrives." She thought about this. Trevor could still be playing both sides. He could. "So you're going to trust him?" Damien looked at her. "I'm going to give him the chance to be the thing he said he wanted to be." He paused. "That's different from trusting him." Nia held his gaze for a moment. "That's generous." "It's practical," he said. "If he's genuine, we gain an approach vector and close the security gap cleanly. If he's not," he shrugged, one slight lift of the shoulder, "we find out in a controlled environment." She went back to the laptop, but the expression on her face when she looked down had shifted by some small degree that she probably didn't notice, and he did. The next 37 hours moved in 2 different speeds simultaneously. For Philip Rourke, they moved with the false confidence of a man who believed he was watching his enemies from a position of concealed advantage. The decoy communications fed through the compromised Foundation access point were meticulously constructed. Ren had spent 4 hours building them to read like genuine internal logistics, complete with minor inconsistencies of the kind that real communications contain and fabricated ones usually don't. Rourke's team reviewed what they believed was the Foundation's internal gala security briefing, Nia's planned arrival time, Damien's stage position during his remarks, the precise 2-minute window when the server room would be accessible during a scheduled system maintenance restart that appeared in the decoy communications but did not exist in the actual gala plan. Rourke read it all and believed it, and built his final approach around it like a man constructing a house on ground he didn't know was hollow. For Nia, those 37 hours moved differently. She spent most of them in the community center, not in the annex building. That was deliberate, visible, allowing Rourke's people to observe her in a location that read as normal, working through the actual crisis that existed beneath the dramatic one. Her board needed to be briefed, carefully and completely, about the Meridian account situation. Her program directors needed contingency protocols in case the next 72 hours produced legal exposure. 3 of the women in the Foundation's housing network needed to be moved to alternate locations as a precaution, silently, using the secondary contact chain that Rourke's network bridge couldn't see because it predated the compromised system by 6 years. She did all of this with the specific competence of a woman who had been doing crisis management for a decade, which meant she did it without visible panic and with complete internal terror because those 2 things had never been mutually exclusive in her experience. They were just the front and back of the same thing. Deshaun worked beside her through most of it. At 4 in the afternoon on the day of the gala, he put a cup of coffee on her desk without being asked and said, "You doing okay?" She looked at the coffee, then at him. "No." "Yeah," he said. "Me neither." He sat down across from her. "We gonna be all right?" "I think so," she said. "I think we built this thing well enough that it holds." She meant the organization. He knew she meant the organization. "But I don't know yet, and I hate not knowing." "You always hate not knowing." "I always have very good reasons to hate not knowing." He almost smiled. She almost smiled. It was the closest either of them had come to anything like that in 40 hours. The Grand Monarch Hotel at 8 in the evening on the night of the reopening gala was a different animal from the hotel that had stood in the rain 48 hours before. Its lobby held flowers, white and deep blue, enormous architectural arrangements that had nothing to do with the standard lily and money smell, and everything to do with someone having a very specific idea about what the space should communicate. The chandeliers were at full. The marble floors had been polished to a depth that made the light seem to come from inside them. Outside on South Wacker, a line of cars moved slowly past the entrance and the doormen. New ones, or the same ones standing differently, with the specific quality of people who had been told something about why their work mattered and had chosen to believe it. 600 invitations had been issued. 612 people arrived, because these things always run over when the story is right. Damien was in the hotel's operational center on the 4th floor at 7:45, in his black suit, reviewing the evening security architecture one final time with Marcus and 2 men from a federal task force who had been in quiet coordination with Viscari's team for the past 18 hours. The federal presence was not coincidental. Wren's financial documentation, packaged correctly and transmitted through proper channels at 6 a.m. the previous morning, had been sufficient to open an active investigation. What the agents needed was location and confirmation, and tonight, if everything performed as designed, they would have both. The lead agent was a woman named Solis. She had the compressed energy of someone accustomed to waiting in the final hour before a long operation concluded. She stood with her arms crossed and her eyes on the security monitor bank and said nothing that wasn't operationally necessary, which Damien respected. "Carver will arrive with Trevor," Damien said, reviewing the sequence one final time. Trevor's keycard activates the secondary maintenance access. Carver enters the server corridor expecting an 8-minute window to install the broadcast device. The window doesn't exist. Marcus's team seals the corridor at the 4-minute mark. "Agent Solis, your people cover the lobby and the ballroom exits." Solis nodded. "Rourke?" "He won't come himself. He's in his hotel, watching what he believes is a live feed of his plan executing. When Carver is taken, he'll understand what happened and he'll move. His vehicle is already under surveillance. You'll have him before he reaches the expressway." "And Hargrove?" "Hargrove is a separate matter. He sold a property. Whether what he knew constitutes complicity is your department, not mine." Solis looked at him. "You're very tidy about jurisdictions for a man with your particular history." "I've been working on it," Damien said. She almost smiled. Almost. "The woman, Holloway, she's arriving at?" 8:30. He glanced at the monitor showing the lobby feed. "She insisted on arriving after the room was full." "Why?" "Because she's not interested in making an entrance," he said. "She just wants to be present." He paused. "She's been present for most of her life in ways nobody saw. She's not in a hurry to perform it." Solis studied him for a moment with the particular gaze of someone filing information. Then she turned back to the monitors and said nothing more. Nia arrived at 8:32 in a dress that was deep burgundy, simple in cut, and said nothing about the industry of fashion or the performance of wealth. She wore her mother's gold ring. Her hair was down. She came through the brass revolving doors and crossed the lobby and the staff member nearest the entrance. A young woman, perhaps 22, who had started at the hotel 6 months before Trevor Langford's termination and had watched everything that followed with the wide-eyed attention of someone still deciding what kind of person they wanted to be in their professional life, looked up and said, "Good evening, Ms. Holloway. Welcome back." Not welcome to the Grand Monarch. Welcome back. Like she had been expected. Like she had always been expected. Nia stopped for just one beat. She looked at the young woman. "Thank you," she said, and meant it in a way that the words barely contained. She found Damien near the entrance to the ballroom. He was standing slightly apart from the crowd in the way he always stood slightly apart, not because he was antisocial, she had understood by now, but because the apart position was where he could see everything. He turned when she approached. He looked at her for a moment. "How are you?" he asked. "Ask me in 2 hours," she said. He nodded. 2 hours. He offered his arm, not with any performance attached to it, just the practical offer of navigation through a crowded space. She took it. They walked into the ballroom together, and the room did what rooms do when the specific people they have been collectively oriented toward arrive. It didn't stop. Not exactly, but it adjusted. A subtle recalibration of attention, and the cameras that Damien's communications team had arranged moved in the quiet professional way of cameras that aren't trying to be noticed. At 9 o'clock, the program began. There were remarks from the hotel's new charitable foundation chair, a woman from the community development sector who spoke for 4 minutes about what hospitality meant when it was built on dignity rather than exclusion. There was a moment where the hotel's new motto was unveiled on a banner behind the stage. Everyone enters with equal worth, in letters that didn't try too hard and said everything. There was applause. Then Damien walked to the microphone. He stood there for a moment before speaking. 600 people in the room. Cameras. History in this specific location doing something history rarely does, which is becoming visible to itself while it's happening. He said, "I bought this hotel because buildings can be replaced." He paused. A person's dignity can't. The room was completely still. What happened in this lobby 2 nights ago was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a choice, made quickly, in front of witnesses, by a man who believed that certain people's worth was legible in their appearance. He looked out at the room. That belief is not unusual. It lives in systems, in institutions, in the specific small decisions people make when they think nobody important is watching. The only unusual thing that happened here was that someone was watching, and that what he saw was someone who, 2 nights ago, didn't look like she belonged, and who, in fact, and this is the thing that matters, had once saved his life without asking anything in return. He looked toward Naya, who was seated at the front of the room, and the room followed his gaze. She did not look away. She didn't perform composure. She just sat there, present, with the specific weight of someone who has been through the last 48 hours and is still in her chair. "I'm not telling this story because it ends well," Damien said. "I'm telling it because it isn't over. What this hotel becomes from tonight is not a monument to one night of justice. It's a daily question. Who do we see when someone walks through the door? What do we assume, and why? Whether the standards we enforce serve human dignity, or whether they dress something else up in the language of standards." He stopped. "That's the work. It doesn't end with a gala." The applause started slowly and built. In the server corridor on the hotel's 3rd floor at 9:04, Trevor Langford swiped his secondary maintenance keycard and the door opened. He stepped back to allow Carver to enter ahead of him. Carver got 4 steps inside the corridor before Marcus's team sealed both ends. The device Carver carried, a broadcast transmitter built into what appeared to be a standard power bank, was recovered without incident. Carver said nothing when he was cuffed. He looked at Trevor with an expression that carried specific fury and specific resignation in approximately equal measure. And Trevor looked back at him and felt the strange, cold clarity of a man who has chosen something irreversible and is standing in the first moment of its irreversibility. He was not, at that moment, certain he had chosen correctly. He was certain only that he had chosen, which was different from what he had been doing for most of his professional life. Agent Solis's team took Carver from the corridor. Marcus looked at Trevor. "You should go back upstairs." "The ballroom?" Trevor said. The word came out uncertain, which was an unfamiliar texture in his own voice. "Mr. Vescari said you were welcome if you wanted to be there." Marcus paused. "Up to you." Trevor stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he took the elevator to the 2nd floor and entered the ballroom through a side door and stood near the back wall where nobody would notice him, and he listened to the rest of the evening from there, alone, in a room full of people, which was a situation he would spend a long time afterward understanding as the most honest position he had occupied in years. Rourke was taken at 9:31 on the northbound approach to the expressway when the vehicle he was in was stopped by 3 unmarked cars. He made no dramatic statement. He asked for his attorney. He got his attorney. He rode in the back of a federal vehicle through the Chicago night with his hands cuffed and his face arranged into the expression of a man conserving whatever resources remained. The resources were insufficient. They had been insufficient for approximately 9 hours, and he hadn't known it. Wren's documentation, combined with Karlovass's voluntary statement, provided the following morning to federal investigators, and the physical device recovered from the server corridor, and 17 months of financial tracing that Rourke had assumed was invisible because he had built it to be invisible, and had not accounted for the specific quality of a financial analyst who had spent 11 years finding things that were built to be unfindable. That documentation was, in the judgment of the lead prosecutor who reviewed it 2 weeks later, among the cleanest organized financial crime cases she had seen in a decade. Ellison Hargrove cooperated. His cooperation was comprehensive and rapid, in the way of a man who understood exactly how much he was holding and how much lighter he would be without it. Trevor Langford was not charged with financial crimes because he had committed none. The discrimination case required a separate process, a civil matter eventually settled through the hotel's new management and foundation structure in a way that did not involve Trevor specifically because the hotel's new ownership chose not to pursue him individually. He was not exonerated. His professional reputation carried what it carried, and he would carry it. He found work eventually, in a smaller context, in a hotel that didn't have marble floors, and he did his job differently. And the difference was real even when it wasn't comfortable, which was most of the time. Carla Voss cooperated fully with investigators. Her cooperation, combined with documentation establishing the manipulation she had been subjected to, resulted in a deferred prosecution agreement. She never worked in nonprofit financial administration again. She found other work. She sent Nia a letter 18 months later, handwritten, 2 pages, that didn't ask for anything and didn't explain anything beyond what had already been explained. It just said what it said. Nia read it twice, put it in a drawer, and did not respond for 3 months. When she did respond, the letter was short. It said, "I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it." She meant it. The Grand Monarch Hotel opened formally as a Vescary property in the weeks following the gala. Its new charitable foundation, with Nia as chair, a position she accepted after 2 weeks of consideration and several direct arguments with herself about what it meant for her discretion and her organization's security profile, began its first grant cycle within 60 days. The grants funded emergency housing for 43 individuals in the first year, along with a workforce training program that placed 61 people in the hospitality industry, specifically at the Grand Monarch and its partner properties, through an initiative that had no educational prerequisites and several community partnerships, one of which was run out of the community center on the south side where Nia had been sitting when she first heard the word Meridian. None of it was triumphant in the way of movie endings. It was work, and it required work. And some of it failed and had to be rebuilt, and some of the people who came through the program didn't make it, and some did, and the ones who did made it through their own effort rather than through any clean transformation engineered by the story. The story just opened a door. What happened beyond the door was human and complicated and ongoing. The marble lobby hung its motto, and the staff who read it every day brought to it what they brought. Their own histories, their own prejudices in various stages of being examined and dismantled, their own fatigue and their own genuine effort. The motto didn't change any of that automatically. Nothing did, automatically. But the question it asked, everybody, every day, was real. And real questions asked persistently in the right context have a way of doing their work. 3 months after the gala, Nia arrived at the hotel early on a Tuesday morning for a foundation board meeting. She came in through the brass revolving doors with her portfolio and her mother's gold ring and the slow tire she kept meaning to fix. The lobby was quiet at that hour, 7:40 in the morning, the breakfast service just beginning, the staff moving through the early routines with the unhurried competence of people who know their work. Nobody looked at her twice, not because she had become known there, though she had, but because nobody was looking at anyone twice at 7:40 in the morning when there was work to do, and the work was clear, and the question had been asked enough times in that space that it had begun, tentatively, imperfectly, to reshape the instinct beneath the answer. She took the elevator to the foundation offices on the 4th floor and put her portfolio on the desk and made herself a terrible cup of coffee from the machine in the corner that still hadn't been replaced and probably never would be. And she sat down and opened the quarterly report and started reading. Damien was in the building. He often was, in those months, shifting his base of operations between the hotel and a legitimate real estate development office he was establishing on the near north side. The legitimate enterprise was slower and less instinctively navigable than what he'd spent 20 years building, and the people who worked in it were different from the people he'd always worked with, and he made mistakes he didn't enjoy making and corrected them, and made different mistakes and corrected those too. He came to the fourth floor at 9:15 because he had a meeting with the foundation's program director at 9:30, and he was punctuality being one of the things about himself he had never had to work on, 15 minutes early. He found Nia still at her desk, the quarterly report spread across 3 surfaces, a second terrible coffee half finished beside her keyboard. He knocked on the open door. She looked up. The expression on her face when she looked up was not guarded. It was just tired and present and real, the expression of someone who had stopped performing anything because the situation no longer required it. "You're early," she said. "I'm always early." "I know." She went back to the report. "Coffee machine still makes terrible coffee." "I've had worse," he said. He came in and sat in one of the 2 chairs across from her desk. He looked at the window. Outside, South Walker Drive was doing what South Walker did. Moving, always moving, the city maintaining its continuous indifference to any specific morning's specific significance. They sat in that room in the quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of people who have nothing to say. The other kind. The kind that comes after a great deal has been said and survived, and the things that remain are the true things, stripped of everything that made them complicated. "I never asked you," she said, still looking at the report, "how you're doing with all of it. The transition, everything." "You didn't," he said. "I'm asking now." He looked at the window for a moment. "It's harder than I expected," he said. "The legitimate work, building something without the tools I spent 20 years developing." He paused. "I keep reaching for things that aren't there anymore. Not because I want them, because they're what I know how to do." She nodded slowly. Not with sympathy exactly, with recognition. "That's what I expected," she said. "Is that supposed to be comforting?" "No," she said. "It's just what I expected." She looked up from the report and looked at him across the desk. Directly. The way she had looked at Trevor Langford in the lobby. The way she had looked at Carver's offer and Rourke's architecture and everything else that had tried to reduce her to something smaller than she was. "The work you're doing is right. It doesn't have to be easy to be right." He held her gaze for a moment. "No," he said, "it doesn't." Outside the window, 42 floors above South Walker Drive, and all of its movement and noise and continuous human urgency, the morning was doing what mornings do, arriving without ceremony, offering what it offered, making no promises about what it would take away. The lobby below them held its motto on the wall in letters that didn't try too hard. The doors kept turning. People kept coming through. And in a small office on the 4th floor of a building that had once thrown a woman out into the rain, 2 imperfect people who had found each other in the specific wreckage of someone else's cruelty, sat in the quiet of an ordinary morning and did the work that ordinary mornings require, which is to say, they kept going, which is the only real victory that survives the fire, which is to say, they were still here, which, some mornings, is everything.